Well, good morning and afternoon, everyone. My name is Aaron Gorell, and thank you for joining us on our 1434th Justice Clearinghouse Partner webinar, Reducing Gun Violence Through Integrated Forensic Evidence Collection, Analysis, and Sharing. In 2006, New Jersey initiated a comprehensive gun violence reduction strategy, becoming the first such effort in the country to create a long-term, statewide, multi-jurisdictional program that draws upon the collection, integration, and management of forensic and crime-related data and intelligence from multiple sources. And so during our webinar today, our presenters will discuss how they transform the investigative and prosecutorial culture of law enforcement and criminal justice agencies across the state. They'll share their keys to success regarding the sharing and analysis of information across forensic, criminal intelligence, and investigative entities at all levels of government. We have three presenters for you today in order of appearance. First up is going to be Dr. Dave Lambert, who's the interim dean of the School of Justice Studies and the director of Justice Systems Training and Research Institute at Rogers Williams University. He has completed work as the co-principal investigator of a research project examining the crime gun intelligence program with the New Jersey State Police. Then Dr. Glenn Pierce, who's a principal research scientist in the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Northeastern University. His most recent research has focused on firearms violence, counterproliferation of dual-use technologies, and weapons of mass destruction and intergroup conflict. Then Lieutenant Colonel Joe Brennan, who's the commanding officer of the investigations branch of the New Jersey State Police, the 13th largest police agency in the country. Under his leadership, a dedicated team of 825 detectives, analysts, scientists, and support staff addresses critical public safety and intelligence challenges across New Jersey. I would like to extend a special thanks to our friends and partners for sponsoring this webinar. Today's presentation is done in partnership with LeadsOnline, which was formerly known as Forensic Technology. LeadsOnline is the pioneer of automatic ballistic identification and the creator of IBIS technology used in more than 80 countries to combat and prevent firearms crime. We truly appreciate our partnership with organizations like LeadsOnline, who are so committed to enhancing and growing our profession. Now, the last couple of things I'd like to address with everyone is some basic housekeeping items. First, this event is being recorded and the formal presentation is scheduled to last about 60 minutes. It will be available to members on the Justice Clearinghouse website, as well as on the LeadsOnline website. Second, this is a listen-only event, but you can type in any questions you have through the Zoom toolbar, and we'll take as many of those questions as possible at the end of the formal presentation. Finally, after today's webinar, there will be a follow-up survey, and we ask that you complete it. Your feedback is shared with our presenters and helps shape everything we do here at Justice Clearinghouse. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn the presentation over to our first instructor for today. Dr. Lambert, it's all yours.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank you for everyone for being here. I'm going to just go through some of the history of how this project started and what the New Jersey State Police and their partners covered. Glenn and Joe, feel free to jump in at any point and during my my discussion, because obviously you folks were intimately involved in many of these details. If you can go to the next slide, please. So, as everything else occurs in this world, there's always some precipitating ideas that go on, some crises. In this case, there was a real concern in the state of New Jersey with violent crime that was increasing, whether it was increasing or not. And it's always an issue for people. They had a lot of opportunities to start to look at their criminal environment and find that a lot of these criminals were crossing different jurisdictional lines. So crime wasn't necessarily local in this point, and it was really highlighted by two tragic events, two different situations where off-duty police officers were killed during interrupting crimes in progress. And the background to those cases were that those individuals weren't necessarily from that particular city; they were from neighboring cities. And again, it showed that the level of gun violence that was crossing different jurisdictional lines, which obviously makes the investigation of these cases a lot more complicated. And one of the other things that occurred that we seem to deal with in a lot of different places across the country is there really is a lack of shooting data, on real-time shooting data, to actually track that. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But One of the issues I believe that came up was the governor's office at one point asked for how many shootings do we have in New Jersey over the last few weeks or last month. And there really is no good answer to that, to having real-time data on shootings. So that became a problem that to be solved later on by the project. But again, that sort of goes to the lack of data, the lack of utility for uniform crime reporting at that time, and some of the common data systems that we use to try to track violence. They're not really necessarily real time, and they don't necessarily help from investigative standpoint or from a tactical or strategic standpoint. Next slide, please. So, in general, I think that was it. Statement of the problem. Again, there was a concern with crime across the state, particularly cross-jurisdictional crime, specifically focused on the Route 21 corridor in New Jersey. That became one of the hotbeds. That's an area in northern New Jersey that people were really concerned with. That really generated a high percentage of crime across the state, something on the lines of 50% of the violent crime. So that became really their first area to start to look at. So that was part of the issue, is how can we focus on firearms crime in these regions where people are crossing jurisdictions. In addition, there was a realization in the field that police detectives don't necessarily use the forensic data that's available. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. In many cases, in some of these situations, the forensic data isn't necessarily available in a timely manner. So ballistics imaging was emerging as a really viable technology to start to match cases across different incidents, but that data has to be fed back into the investigative process. So that was an issue. The ATF started to do a lot of work around the ideas of tracing crime guns through their tracing center. And again, that was a situation where that necessarily wasn't utilized by investigators. So there had to be some improvements in terms of looking at how that could be useful for detectives, and just the use in general of other intelligence data. In a lot of situations, traditional investigators don't necessarily use intelligence to the way they should. And again, this also coincides with around this time with the emergence of fusion centers that I'll talk about in a minute. So a lot of different issues are coming to the fore here, particularly the emergence of crime gun intelligence centers, which is supported by the ATF and other agencies, but shows a lot of potential for enhancing investigations in these different cities where we actually have the ability to use the IBIS technology, ballistics imaging, as well as crime gun tracing to actually support investigations in those particular communities. And lastly, statewide crime gun intelligence centers had really received less attention, but had a bigger promise to have a bigger sway across a region than some of the small city agencies. Places like Chicago, Los Angeles, for a long time have had CJICs, but they were relatively local in terms of their focus. And in New Jersey, had an idea about trying to make this a statewide crime gun intelligence center, which had a real good impact in terms of this particular approach. If you want to go to the next slide. So one of the things that I wanted to focus on in terms of what this was and what this wasn't, and it's really important in terms of what made New Jersey a little bit different. This was a multi-agency statewide strategy. It involved the state police. It involved hundreds of police departments across New Jersey, federal agencies, prosecutors, very dynamic and very well coordinated effort as they went through the different periods of time to develop a more comprehensive approach to gun violence, which really matched sort of the criminal profiles of these individuals who were not necessarily staying in the same neighborhood, the same communities. So that was really important, and that really gave the agencies as well as policymakers a real good understanding of what was going on across the state in a strategic manner that helped them develop programs going forward. And the other thing that was important is that there were different complementary initiatives. This wasn't really a one-off, which is often the case in many organizations where they try something. They do a weed and seed. It lasts just as long as the grant lasts, and then it fades off. This was a comprehensive effort over a long period of time, almost 2 decades, to actually develop a series of initiatives to actually reduce violence in these particular communities in coordination with the New Jersey State Police. So very different approach to trying to attack and reduce gun violence. And there was also a conscious effort to match criminal intelligence with the enforcement piece, to really bring together all the pieces that they had to try to impact the criminal environment in a way that was going to be long lasting. And one of the things I think this really represents in our situation is this was really a situation where a large scale change management occurred, where the individuals who were running this program understood that they had to bring together a diverse group of individuals from different agencies, different cultures. They had to create some type of vision and strategy to meld these groups together so that they had some type of comprehensive approach to violence. And they had to make sure that people understood that, and they actually had some wins along the way. And I think they did a really fantastic job with how they approached those things. So this project wasn't necessarily a single agency initiative. Here with the New Jersey State Police, we're here to help. It was more of a collaborative effort with a lot of different agencies, and they merged those strategies depending on the different jurisdictions and what they needed. So really, really important to look at the long term of this and how well they were able to accomplish a collaborative effort. Next slide, please. One of the things that was unique about New Jersey's approach and the state police approach was they really embraced the whole idea of intelligence-led policing. This really was an opportunity for someone to apply this idea of using intelligence to support criminal investigations, to support policy, to inform policymakers on strategic changes that need to be made. And that was really backed up by, in this case, a series of strategies. In one particular situation, the New Jersey State Police wrote the Practical Guide for Intelligence-Led Policing. They were trying to inform their internal customers, all their officers and staff, as well as some of the external organizations they were working with, that this is a different way of approaching the world, that we're actually going to use criminal intelligence to support investigations, to highlight strategies that work, to be more evidence-based. And again, that's a huge change in a traditional law enforcement field. And part of that had to do with their ability really to work closely with urban police departments. What I thought was really interesting about New Jersey in general was they had strategy. So at one point, the governor's office wrote a safe street strategy. That was part of really documenting what they were going to do and how they were going to expand that idea to other communities. They also had a series of change agents. It's very different than how a lot of organizations work. They had people such as Colonel Fuentes at the time who were really invested in intelligence gathering and the use of intelligence to support investigations. And they used that to develop a vision and strategy, in this particular case, to address firearms crime. And that's not necessarily an easy thing to do in a large state with a lot of different organizations. But they did create that vision, and they were able to implement intelligence-led policing and actually use systems that they had in place to support investigations. Again, they had organizational champions within the agency and also within the regional operations and intelligence center, their fusion center, that actually helped investigators to support that. And again, one of the things that I thought was critical in how they did that is they had folks like Joe Brennan, who actually at that point were seasoned investigators who had worked in many of the urban environments and who really understood the criminal environment and were able to apply intelligence principles to do that. You can kind of see in some of these bullet points here, they essentially implemented the intelligence cycle, data processing, the collection of data, the integration of different data sources to produce better analytical products, putting those products out to people in the field. And one of the things that was our frustration in my fusion center in Massachusetts is we collected a lot of data, but we didn't always get it back out to the users in a timely manner. And nothing frustrates police officers more than if you don't put information back into the field. They will dutifully collect and do a really fine job of comprehensively collecting data. But at the end of the day, that data has to help them do what they're working on. So it has to help them support investigations. And not everybody does that very well. But in this case, the ROC did a fantastic job of understanding the intelligence cycle and the importance of getting that information back and disseminating it in a manner that could be useful for people on the ground. And that was really important, as was coordinating the investigators and prosecutors and doing what we term as relentless follow-up. So it wasn't just a one-off in one particular agency. It was a coordinated effort throughout that particular piece. Again, collaboration was key to this particular effort. They had later, we'll talk about the technology systems that supported that. As they matured, they were able to bring on and develop better technology. And again, they were supported throughout this process by a variety of different organizations, including the New York, New Jersey UASI, which helped them with some funding for some of their earlier projects. So really a fantastic job. And again, I think leadership was critical to this because they had strong leadership, because they supported the whole idea of intelligence-led policing and the use of their Fusion Center to support investigations. That really had a dynamic impact on their success in this project. And the focus across a lot of these different specific initiatives was focusing on hot individuals, hot locations, and hot guns, and particularly the firearm piece where they were able to trace and guns and also match casings and firearms across different crime incidents. So that's really a difficult thing. Again, putting all these different agencies together so that they can actually share information, that they actually see the value of collecting that information is really valuable. What I found really interesting about this project also was the fact that they had a series of incremental wins. They had a project called the Violent Enterprise Source Targeting Program that was a federal, state, and local approach to dealing with gangs and firearms violence. That was followed up by something called Project Watchtower, which also involved the implementation of targeting certain individuals that were high frequency criminals. They also had, we should talk a little bit about CoreStat, and that was their multi-jurisdictional information sharing effort, where they brought a lot of people together in a room initially along the Route 21 corridor, and they just shared information in Essex and Passaic County originally. Some of the bigger communities like Newark, Elizabeth, Jersey City, Patterson, and some of the surrounding communities, where they sat in a room and they just shared information, were able to develop a network of contacts and really used intelligence to support their criminal investigations. They also had a program called the Targeted Integrated Deployment Effort, TIDE, another opportunity where they were able to implement intelligence-led approaches to supporting investigations. Again, the Regional Operations Intelligence Center had a key role in that type of effort. So they were able to take the idea, again, for me being a former Fusion Center person, this was an opportunity to actually operationalize and was really the model for what a Fusion Center was supposed to do. And they were able to do that because they understood the relationship of data to solving criminal cases. Again, not an easy feat. Fusion Centers still struggle with the idea of trying to find relevance in the criminal intelligence approach. So again, this was for me, it was a big deal. And they later expanded that to having at least 3 real-time crime centers in different regions of the state, which also just supported local investigations to a higher degree. So, they really understood this. They really understood their approach to collaboration, to bringing people up to speed on how they did all these things. Next slide, please. This was some of the series of initiatives that they accomplished over this period of time. So again, in the beginning, they had a lot of structural things, a lot of strategic documents, policing the homeland. They had an investigative structure and strategy approach that focused on intelligence-led policing. They developed the guide for their customers Again, Governor Corsine in 2007 put out a safe street strategy that articulated exactly how the entire state was going to approach these things. 2008 was a period of time where because they didn't have a state law quite at that point, the Attorney General put out a directive on crime gun intelligence to collect data on ballistics imaging, to collect data so that they could do crime gun tracing and stolen gun approaches. So it was a directive. It was sort of a high-level suggestion from the Attorney General's office for police agencies. But that was the first sort of stake in the ground of we need to start to use some of this data to support investigations. That led to the development of things like CompStat, where they actually developed these information sharing meetings on a monthly basis. Then they expanded that later on to having not only monthly meetings for the executive levels, but also having 3 times weekly types of meetings with different investigative groups. So they developed this information sharing environment that was really, really advanced in terms of compared to other organizations and what they were able to do. And then I'll talk a little bit more about NJ-POP. But again, the development of intelligence products becomes a huge piece in terms of how they move forward. Next slide, please. I think one of the key things that happened is in 2013, the state was able to actually pass a mandate that solidified the use of ballistics imaging, the NIBIN process, E-trace, and NCIC gun checks. So that's where we saw a rapid increase in submissions once the mandate occurred. The Attorney General's directive didn't have that much of an impact in terms of submissions, but this had a real impact. So again, they've got legislative support, they've got political backing for some of these things. Police departments got behind this particular effort, and we started to see an increase. And that led to some of these other innovations like RAIN that we'll talk about in a minute. NIBIN alerts, again, these business process improvements that become really important to actually move the needle in terms of their ability to support investigations. And all these things, developing some type of standard reporting systems, having a list of all relevant law enforcement end users, be able to send out alerts and intelligence to becomes really important as part of the intelligence-led policing process. And they were constantly reviewing how they did business, how they can improve their systems, all those things that are a part of a change management approach. Then we'll talk a little later in the presentation about the implementation of backtrace, a really advanced technology, and then later the implementation of their GVTRT. Next slide. So one of the things that I thought was key to the development of an intelligence-led policing strategy was trying to fill in the gap for having some type of way to track shootings across the state. Again, as I mentioned, UCR doesn't do a good job. It's usually a year or two behind. So they had a problem. They recognized that they had to do something. So they started, simply by trying to develop an internal database that they collected from the ROC and the RTTCs so that they could just track shootings that happened in communities across the state. So, analysts had to do a lot of the legwork at that point, I believe. But they were able to get the New Jersey State Police Information Technology Bureau, their Ceasefire Operations Bureau together and develop a really simple use database so that they could actually collect this data and all the information that maybe policymakers would need, and also available to investigators to stop matching cases across different time periods and locations. So information about the shooting incidents. Again, very few of these statewide shooting databases actually exist. So it's really important as a process improvement piece that they actually did this and were able to start to track violence and get away from sort of what people thought were happening and actually have real evidence-based information on the level of violence in these particular communities and regions. Next slide, please. One of the things that, again, was a huge innovation is what they called the rapid assessment in NIBIN, or the RAIN initiative. Prior to implementing this business process improvement, the state police recognized that they had some issues with the process of forensics. The data would come into the lab. It would really require 10 or more different processing steps. And it was often a slow process. It delayed the analysis to a point where it wasn't always useful for investigators. And if that was the case, in some cases, investigators simply wouldn't submit their data if it wasn't useful for them. One of the glitches early on was the labs would analyze they would do some basic forensics. They'd return the firearm to the originator agency, and then they have to bring it back if they found that there was actually a NIBIN hit, so they could actually do a confirmation. So the system was clunky. It wasn't really useful for investigators at that point. So they sat down and they did a business process improvement process. And that's the next slide, please. So they did something really smart. They brought all the key stakeholders, all the people that were involved, investigators, forensics people, analysts from different agencies. They got in a room, they broke up into different subgroups, and they talked about what happens in the process, what it does, and how they could improve the process. So, and through a lot of different discussions, they highlighted some of the issues. One of the things that happened along the same line is prior to RAIN, all the firearms evidence was submitted to one lab in New Jersey. So they'd have to drive firearms across the state to one lab, which didn't necessarily make it easy for investigators in these different communities. After they went through some of these process improvements, they decided to have some type of satellite pickup situations where police agencies could drop off these firearms at regional state police barracks, and made it a lot easier and much more likely that departments would actually contribute these types of evidence to the lab. So again, those types of thought processes went into trying to develop better organizational, operational level policies. Next slide. This is just a diagram of before RAIN, whether necessarily the choke points were. Again, a longer process. And what the state police were trying to develop is a process where getting NIBIN could be 24 to 48 hour turnaround, which makes it much more valuable for investigators rather than having backlogs. Again, some of the backlogs with ballistics imaging, things like that are, 8 to 10 months in some cases. So not necessarily valuable for ongoing investigations. But through the NIBIN process, through this discussion of RAIN, they were able to eliminate many of the choke points and move towards a system that was much more investigator oriented. Next slide. Again, a key piece of RAIN was partnerships and collaboration. They brought everybody in. Not only did they do this business process improvement, they also held these local workshops through the Attorney General's office to actually outline for these different police agencies the new process and the viability of using NIBIN in E-Trace and some of the other sources of data to support investigations. So again, one of the key pieces of change management is they not only did the change, but they advertised, they made people aware of it. They showed the incentives for why organizations should jump into this particular types of forensic analysis. So it had a huge impact on getting data into the labs. And again, their goal was to do what Pete Gagliotti refers to as really a kind of 360 review of the firearm. They're looking at both the inside and the outside of the gun to process everything they can possibly have from that firearm. That includes DNA, fingerprints, any type of trace evidence, as well as the ballistic evidence. So, and that's really important in terms of making full use of the evidence they have in their possession. So, and they did a lot of work working with different agencies to develop these processes that will make it more investigative friendly. Again, one of the things that we'll show in a second is just the fact that they They developed a standardized report. They had 8 different labs across the state, all with different agencies. They didn't necessarily all operate the same way, but one of the things that they wanted to do was try to standardize the output so that everybody saw a NIBIN report that it all looked the same. So, and it sounds simple, but when you're dealing with multiple agencies, it can be really difficult to get everybody on the same page. And they were able to do that. Again, I think their underlying goal was to get dissemination in a way that people who needed the information could get it. So again, they set up a simple listserv with all the stakeholders and made sure that once they had reports, once they had NIBIN alerts, that they were pushing that data out. And you can see on the graph the dramatic increase in all the submissions as a result of going through that RAIN process, getting a new business process to produce NIBIN data and the impact that it had in terms of submissions. Obviously, this is another situation, just like fingerprinting. The more submissions they have, the more matches they're going to have, the more likely they're going to be able to start matching cases across different jurisdictions. So it's hugely important that they had the 75% increase in submissions. It is a huge opportunity to solve crimes in these communities. Next slide. Again, another look at the increase in NIBIN leads, cases that had proximal cases that could be prioritized. Again, these weren't confirmed submissions, these were leads, but the increase in leads just gives investigators a greater chance of moving forward with some of these cases. So again, some of the business process improvements they did, some of the approaches that they took to organizing and collaborating with different agencies had a tremendous impact on their ability to process this data and have these submissions. Next slide. And this looks like, not a big deal, but I think for me, it was really important that having a standardized report, having a way to get information out to different agencies that are reporting, that are working on cases. I think that makes it a lot simpler for an investigator to be able to understand who they have to talk to, what other cases this could potentially be matched to in terms of some of their ballistic evidence. So again, that's really important. And again, they sort of cobbled together a listserv, just a distribution list of all the different agencies that were cooperating, that were coming to CoreStat, that were participating in some of that information sharing effort. And again, that's a small step, but again, that's a really big opportunity to be able to develop a network where you can actually share information from people who are seeing the same criminals in their communities over and over again. And the NIBIN alert itself was a way just to standardize across these different labs, again, that work for different people and be able to do that. Once they built this, once they had a dissemination vehicle, then they were able to finish the intelligence cycle, get information out to people, receive feedback on that particular information, and then further enhance their systems with other data like license plate readers, arrest data, the E-Trace data, some of the other offender profiles they got from the prison and probation system. So again, they were able to collate at the Rock all this information that had a lot of value for tactical investigations. For anybody, I'm going to turn it over now to Glenn Pierce, and he'll talk about some of the technological and data improvements.
Hi, I'm going to show quite a few statistics, but I'm going to just point out the 1 or 2 numbers on different slides that are important. We're looking at what was the impact of these programs in terms of the collection and utility of data and evidence to law enforcement. And what was one of the major innovations they introduced late in our project called Backtrace, which basically was able to computerize many of these processes in a way that is unique in law enforcement. The major objectives in the data portion of any intelligence-led policing program is to expand the scope and geographic coverage, enhance the quality and timeliness of data, the things that Dave has gone over, integrate these data sources if it's possible, improve the usability and analytics, and ensure dissemination to relevant actors. And I'll just sort of as a scene stealer, bury the lead. They were able to integrate a good deal of what Davis went over in a way that is useful to individual investigators, to political leaders, administrators, the whole range of relevant law enforcement officers who are involved with trying to reduce crime, in particular violent crime. So we're in looking at what they did, we're going to focus on two of the systems and a little bit less on another system that they implemented. The NJ-POP system on assault, firearm assault and murder victim data, and the ballistics evidence system, NIBIN. And we're going to look at how these systems worked, how they improved, and what the increase in potential value was. It's also the case that there are a great many other systems, data sources that they're collecting and integrating with their overall effort, but we're not going to look at those in particular. NJ-POP, as Dave mentioned, provides statewide data on fatal and non-fatal shootings. FBI provides data on gun assaults, but not on shootings, and it's generally a year or two or more after the events, so they're not useful in terms of tactical use in police and law enforcement efforts. The key is this data is acquired and available on a daily basis, acquired on a statewide basis, and it's acquired in terms of the NJ-POP on victims, suspects, witnesses, locations, and provides investigative case links to other potential cases, and can be integrated with other types of information collected by NJ, New Jersey State Police. So what this is an example of what it provided on a strategic level. You can think of this as a strategic form of information to political leaders, very important. Hey, what's going on in my state? To administrators, what do I have to do in terms of allocating resources? And the public. And it also can help demonstrate if there's a problem, how do we address it? And you can see between 21 and 22, not only did gun homicides go down, but gun shootings went down. And that wouldn't be known in most states. So that is important information in saying, how are we doing? Now, what specifically is operating to produce those decreases needs more information, but at least it tells you what direction you're going in. It also provides, NJ-POP also provided and provides useful tactical information. So you get information in 2022 on 1,062 shooting victims, on 352 suspects from 110 cities. This is a statewide basis, and it helps people on a very, very, not a real-time basis, but an almost real-time basis. Where are the problems? Where do we have to look? And if you look down here, if you look at the lower end of the map, you'll see a set of mostly murder shooting victims. You will also see when we go to NIBIN data, there's a patch of NIBIN guns recovered, but not with no offenders. So there's a bunch of guns that are being used that are involved in that little set of shootings down at the lower end of New Jersey, lower end of the map. As Dave mentioned, RAIN was a second major gun violence tool that New Jersey optimized as much as possible, and probably more than many other states did. They wanted to optimize it to the value not only in the courtroom, but also for investigators. And for that, you needed to reduce the inefficiencies, as Dave went over, to reduce the time lag. If it's 4 weeks or a month later for an investigator, it may not be that useful. And expand the collection of evidence that's actually collected. So we see more guns were returned, but also more types of evidence was collected. Excuse me, and that was accomplished through the extending the program, the standards and protocols of collecting ballistics information. So you collect information not just in case of whether there was a shooting victim, but if there's no shooting victim, but there was a shooting, collect the evidence. So what we find is that New Jersey, compared to other states, so to get a feeling for whether this is working, how much evidence, ballistics evidence in this case, this would be casings involved in shooting events, how many pieces of evidence are collected per case? Very often more than one gun's involved. Well, on a national level, it's 1.4 pieces of evidence. So that would suggest 1.4 guns, different guns used on average. In New Jersey, they collect 1.86 pieces of evidence for firearm incidents. That's 30% more. So more evidence is being collected. What type of evidence is being collected? Well, New Jersey collects information on the type of events and incidents associated with NIBIN incidents that are connected to each other. So in this case, you have only casing evidence found, no assault victims. That's 36% of the cases. In some police departments, they might, if there's no victim, they might be a little bit less likely to collect the casing evidence. Now you miss an opportunity to possibly correlate that incident with another incident where a victim did occur. You also may miss an opportunity to talk to people in the neighborhood who might know something about the shooting event, but even though there was no one shot. Assault victim casings and other non-victim shooting casings. So somebody may be shot, but there's other evidence of another gun being involved that was not involved in actually a victim being shot. So a good deal of information that might be missed sometimes because it's not seen as important. The protocols encourage and support police in collecting all the evidence that they can find at a shooting incident case. What this does, it allows police departments in New Jersey and other places where this is done to see whether an incident, a shooting incident in one case, is connected to shooting incidents in another case. And in New Jersey, 41% of the shooting incidents are connected to more than 3 or more incidents. This provides an opportunity for investigators to collaborate across incidents potentially and see whether or not there may be connections. And whereas one incident may have information that doesn't really connect to a perpetrator, another incident may, but the two combined may help investigators in both instances. You're also more likely to get better sense of what the geographic incidence of shootings are. So here you see in New Jersey, shooting incidents where a gun was recovered and where a gun was not recovered. And you'll see the lower part of the map of New Jersey, a little bit of redness where there are a number of incidents where there was no gun recovered. And that's the same area which you saw a little cluster of NJ shooting. So the two systems in that instance may be helpful in terms of focusing people's attention on a emerging or an existing problem. In any given situation, a NIBIN link to an NJ pop link can potentially help investigators. So what happened at the end of our project was that a system called Backtrace, which integrates all of the data systems that we've been talking about, from the collection through to the dissemination of that information. If systems are, and it also integrates the information across these data systems. And finally, it delivers information to law enforcement personnel, relevant law enforcement personnel, in a way that is very accessible electronically over the internet. And it also delivers analytic tools to investigators or crime analysts or administrators. And finally, I should say, it provides not only feedback, but it provides a link to actually actionable research. I'll just say one thing. If most of these systems remained basically isolated in silos, even if they were electronic, it would be very hard to integrate all this information. What Backtrace has done is it now allows individuals to see the information in a way that doesn't require them to go from one data system to another data system to another data system. And that inevitably either slows things down or means certain things won't be followed up. Here we have a form of one-stop shopping in a sense. I mean, it's not perfect, but it doesn't exist, to my understanding, on a state level in other states. So here's an example of data integration. If you look at the number of persons arrested for a gun assault or gun possession in New Jersey in 2021, 2023, see what other information those arrestees are connected to. I mean, it doesn't show you the individual connection, but it shows you those 11,000 were connected to 783 murder or shooting victims, 582 shooting suspects. This is in 2022. Any arrest, of course, they're going to be connected to many arrests. They tend, gun assault individuals tend to be individuals who have a record. They're also associated with NIBIN and TRACE and other CODIS information. And you have information on whether they've been to jail or in prison. So you could look, if you thought of this as a Venn diagram, you could look at which individuals are showing up across those multiple systems. Many of them, most of them probably won't, but some will, and those are ones that you may want to take a very careful look at. It also allows you, without much effort, allows you to look at information of arrestees that may, or other individuals that may have been involved in shootings, may have been involved with, been arrested for various crimes, or arrested for gun-related crimes. To what extent do people stay in one city? So what we asked the managers of Backtrace to do is say, for people who were arrested from 2015 to 2022 and had 5 or more arrests, they're multiple arrestees, what percent of them had their arrests in only one city? 14%. What percent did their arrests occur in four or more different cities? So a quarter of them had arrests in 4 or more cities. Simply pointing out the fact that this type of problem leaks across boundaries. And in order to identify problems, it helps to be able to follow that leakage across boundaries. It's that simple. Now, the one system that we had, which allowed us to look at the specific implementation of Backtrace information to a program, because remember, this Backtrace got going in 2022, 2023. Our study wrapped up in April of 2023. So the one example that we were able to look at where Backtrace information, now this information could be used before Backtrace was in place, but Backtrace makes it that much easier and that much more possible to do. And this was the Gun Violence Reduction Task Force. Okay, I got to get going. And basically, what that does is it allows you to share information on high-risk suspects who are associated with at least one firearm incident. And this is provided to prosecutors that have need information to articulate rationales to justify bail for most prolific and problematic recidivists. So in this instance, there are 300,000 people a year arrested in New Jersey. This is 511 who are identified that you want to take a careful look in terms of your bail decisions. And these people are people who may deserve to be incarcerated in jail until, at least for a period, or until their trial. And what you found was, of the 511 that were presented to about 10 or 12 a day that were presented to prosecutors and judges, almost all of these were accepted as individuals that should have should require bail, which means they probably go to jail, at least for a period. What do we know about backtrace being used by other law enforcement actors? We didn't know the specific programs. We do know that the number of searches from 2021 to 2022 of law enforcement agents with access to backtrace doubled from 8,000 to 17,000. And the total user hours went up by over, in other words, people using backtrace went from 4,500 to 26,000 hours, increase of over 400%. This is remarkable, actually, in terms of any internet multimedia site that opened up a new multimedia site would love numbers like this. We weren't able to look at particular programs and their impact on crime, but we could look at the overall trends in gun crime, gun homicides and incidents in New Jersey compared to other states in the country as a whole, because that information is available through the National Center for Health Statistics, mortality statistics by Center for Disease Control collects that. In 2013, New Jersey, which is sort of beginning, this is the beginning of when maybe many of the NJ Pop programs got their legs under them. This New Jersey was 5% below the national average in terms of gun homicide rates. By 2021, they were 52% below. Obviously, gun crimes went up. We know that during COVID, but New Jersey's increase was less, and New Jersey's much less. And the gap between New Jersey and the nation as a whole became increasingly wider over the 2013 to 2021 period. Now I'd like to pass off to probably the most interesting part of the presentation, to Joe Brennan, and he's going to talk about what they're doing today.
Thanks, Glenn. Thanks, Steve. Thanks, Aaron. And it's important to note that what Dave and Glenn and I, what they talked about, what I'm about to talk about, are the result of the efforts of hundreds of law enforcement, state, local, federal law enforcement, prosecutors, scientists, analysts, over a 16-year period that I was lucky enough to be part of and around to tell the story. Next slide, please, Glenn. So basically, what do we do? What do we do with all this that Dave and Glenn have talked about? Well, we reduce crime, and how do we do that? Command intent, and our command intent in New Jersey is data and technology drive analysis. Analysis drives priorities. Priorities drive operations. And how do we communicate this? Through flat and fast communication. And we value impact over activity, results. We're interested in the results. And because we have all this data, we can measure. We want tangible, measurable results. So we don't say we're reducing gun violence in the state of New Jersey. We say we're reducing the number of people shot in the state of New Jersey. And have some updated stats to show that we're still on the right track. If we go to the next slide. We're down. Yep, right there. We're down 21% in shooting victims. That's over 13% over 2023 and a 25% reduction in 2022. So I could just tell you two quick stories about how we did that. In June of 2021, we were up, like most of the country, we were 89% up in statewide shooting victims. But as Glenn indicated, that's when we gained the ability to see all of the data we've been collecting since 2008, all in one place. And we learned things when we turned on, kind of flipped the switch on Backtrace then. At that time, I was the Fusion Center director. So I had command intent up until analysis driving priorities. I didn't have direct control over operations, but I'll tell you what we were able to do. We were able to see, through analysis, we do incredible amount of analysis on criminal shooting environment, and we learned that year over year, 78% of our victims have extensive criminal histories indicative of narco distribution, gun possession, and stealing cars. The other 22% of people shot were standing next to the 78%. What we learned as well is that those individuals, not all car thieves and narco distributors in the state of New Jersey are shooters, but all of our shooters are narco distro and car thieves. So we had this incredible amount of information, but when we turned on Backtrace, we were able to see it playing out in real time. So we saw in June of 2021 that we were making, as a statewide law enforcement community, through APHIS, we were able to see that we were arresting 250 people a day in a 24-hour period. Without fail, statistically, 10 a day of those individuals were involved in shootings as either a suspect or a victim or both. So there were opportunities. Our law enforcement were coming into contact with individuals likely to shoot or be shot every single day. We have bail reform in the state of New Jersey, but we have a provision of bail reform that lets local prosecutors argue for pretrial detention based on threat to public safety. We have individuals running around the state of New Jersey that have been shot 4, 5, 6, 7 times. We posited that they were threats to public safety. We brought this data and information to the Attorney General of the state of New Jersey, who is the chief law enforcement officer and has the ability to author directives. And he created a directive called the Gun Violence Reduction Task Force. And it's not a task force of cops busting in doors at 5 o'clock in the morning. It's a task force of lawyers, prosecutors, and analysts who reviewed the information that I just talked about on a daily basis, prepared, brought all of the cumulative intel together in one place on individuals likely to shoot or be shot who were arrested in the last 24 hours, and give prosecutors the ability to argue for pretrial detention based on threat to public safety. In 2022, so we started the task force in 2022, 511 people, they made the difference. 77% of them were detained. That's about 0.0044% of the 9 million people in the state of New Jersey, and under 0.5% of the 79,000 people arrested. Those 511 people were responsible for 6,044 arrests. 1,471 of those were gun arrests. It's an average of about 12.5 arrests per person, 3 gun arrests per person. So we're talking about the worst of the worst. 208 were suspects, 343 were victims, and 129 were linked to further shootings through NIBIN. So they're linked to at least 680 shootings. Over the course of the year, 55% of them remained in custody. That's in a state with bail reform. That's significant. 280, that's 281 individuals. So a very, very small number of individuals. And this was palatable to the Attorney General and the politics in place. We were able to not violate the spirit of bail reform, but still significantly reduce shootings. And you saw that by 25% that year, 25%. 230 went back out, 105 were rearrested, 5 were suspects in shootings, and it was an average of 135 days to rearrest. But that just gave us a tremendous amount of data to show the recidivist nature and the small number of people that were driving crime in the state of New Jersey. If you go to the next slide, Glenn. So in June of 2023, now I was the branch commander of the investigations branch for the New Jersey State Police. So that was 825 detectives, analysts, and scientists. So now I had 415 operational detectives at my disposal. And in June of 2023, now, following a year with a 25% reduction, we saw a reduction now diminishing as we got into the warm weather months. We were at around 2% And the 28-day was bad. We were increasing in shootings. The warm weather months were approaching, which are historically significant spikes in victims. So we needed to do something proactive. So what we did was we looked at the previous year. There were 1,056 people shot. So I convened my command staff, and I proposed that the New Jersey State Police could have impact on the number of people shot, and we're going to devise a plan to reduce the number of people shot to under 1,000 people for the remainder of the year. And my commanders, of course, looked at me and said, "How are we going to do that?" And I said, "Easy. We're going to get 58 people unshot." So how do we go about getting people unshot? Again, we looked at the data that we were able to have influence over in real time. The previous year, although it was a really, really good year with a 25% reduction, 191 of our victims were wanted at the time that they were shot. That's a lever that we can pull. We have a fugitive unit in the state of New Jersey that's partnered with the United States Marshal Task Force and state and local and federal partners across the state. What they normally would do is conduct large-scale operations in big cities and largely make arrests based on numbers, and we would clear dockets of local sheriff's departments, generally arresting people that have no impact on the criminal shooting environment. We started to focus in. We created a list with backtrace of about 1,000 individuals that were driving violent crime in the state of New Jersey, and this is based on objective criteria, based on past behavior and their criminal histories, NIBIN hits, and the number of shootings they've been involved in. And we looked at who are wanted out of that list, and we started to affect warrant details. And we started to immediately drive down again the number of people shot in the state of New Jersey. That was the metric for success. All of the levers that we pulled were identifying vulnerabilities in those individuals that were likely to shoot or be shot, and pulling those levers to reduce the number of people shot. That's the metric, not how many people we arrested, not how many guns we got off the streets. Those certainly were part of it, but the metric for success is always, are we reducing the number of people shot in the state of New Jersey? And I see it's 1400 or 2 o'clock right now, so I'll open it up for questions from the audience. Thank you very much for listening to us. But if there's any questions out there, I'll be happy to entertain them.
Fantastic. Joe, Dave, Glenn, thank you all so much for a really great presentation. Folks, we are going to go into kind of the question and answer portion of this webinar. If you have any questions, please do get them into the Q&A box on the Zoom toolbar. Wanted to make sure everyone knew that on October 16th, we have our next Crime Gun Investigations webinar, which is redefining the crime laboratory. I'm going to go ahead and put a link to the registration page for that in case you might be interested. But if you don't get that link or can't find it, please go to the Justice Clearinghouse website. From the menu bar, select webinar schedule. And again, you'll find that webinar on October 16. All right, gentlemen, if you're ready, I'd love to start working our way through as many questions as possible. All right, first question goes to Brittany. Brittany wanted to know, does every agency in the state have access to the LEADS database, or is it specific to those that are working on this project?
Aaron, you cut off right at the end there. Is it specific to?
Okay. Does every agency in the state have access to the LEADS database, or is it specific to those that are working on your project?
So good, really good question. So I'm assuming we're talking about the NIBIN tips and leads. We have a distribution group, and the process is automated. All 8 of our NIBIN labs in the state of New Jersey are part of a community of interest that's facilitated by the Fusion Center, and that included the standardization of what the tip and lead information looks like. It goes out through Backtrace. It's automated. It goes out with the NIBIN lead, a timeline, and an association chart to a distribution group of individuals, who right to know, need to know. So basically, detectives, prosecutors, federal agents, and they're also discussed at regional crime reduction strategy meetings across the state. And in the state of New Jersey, too, all police departments at this point have access to Backtrace, and we have about 9,000 of the 33,000 police officers in the state are active users. Does that answer the question?
If it doesn't, Brittany, please do feel free to respond back in the Q&A box, and we can definitely go back to that.
And Aaron, I put my cell phone number and I'll put my email in there too. If people are shy or have additional follow-ups too, I'll make myself available.
Outstanding. Thank you, sir. All right, next question goes to Elizabeth. We have over 1,000 leads a year and limited analysis resources in my unit. How are you tracking and prioritizing NIBIN leads?
So we have a dashboard that collects right now. There's 734 NIBIN leads that have been distributed year to date. Those, it takes about 2 days for the evidence to get from the street to the lab, and it's under a day for those leads to get turned around. So we track all of that as well. There's about 10 guns that are active in the environment right now that are unrecovered, that have between 6 and 13 victims. So we prioritize them on the guns that are most active in the environment. And then we start to look at the people that surround them, because we have all the information on victim suspects and witnesses. And then we start to look at vulnerabilities in those individuals as well. Are they wanted? Do they have a suspended driver's license? Are they currently incarcerated? Are they related to any other NIBIN hits? Do they have any pending charges? And we put all that information together in one place. We conduct a weekly strategy meeting for the intent purpose of reducing the number of people shot in the state of New Jersey. It was called U1K for, as I stated before, in 2023, we were looking to get under 1,000. We achieved that. We had 922 victims, too many, but under 1,000. It was the safest year for shooting victims in the state of New Jersey since we've been tracking this since 2008. And then we now changed the name of the tactical meeting to U9C for under 900 victims. And we are tracking very, very nicely for under 900 victims this year. But during those meetings, we look at, it's comprised of all levels of multiple agencies, from detectives to the lieutenant colonel chairing the meeting. It's comprised of FBI, ATF, HSI, and DEA agents as well. And we start the meeting. So the name of the meeting is U9C. That's the intent, under 900 victims. So everything we talk about is toward that end. We look at where in the last 7 days shootings have occurred, where they're popping up. We look at individuals in those jurisdictions that are likely to shoot or be shot. We look to see if they have warrants. And then we immediately start to make plans to go pick them up. And we also have the local police in those jurisdictions there to debrief those individuals as well. And if you're going after recidivist gun possessors, the likelihood of them having a gun in their possession and that gun being a NIBIN gun are extremely high. And we have data to show that that's what's happening. And that's why this system is iterative. We look to see if there's any individuals on parole in those jurisdictions, and we partner up with the parole to conduct visits. Again, if you're visiting somebody who's a recidivist gun possessor, chances of them having a gun in their possession are very, very high. And then we just start to work our way down those various levels. But NIBIN hits are also a big part of the conversation. If there's an active gun in the jurisdictions, we start to look at the individuals surrounding that and develop an investigative strategy. Then somebody owns it, and then we start to track that investigation. So it's prioritized based on the level of violence associated with that gun, just like we do with people. We're looking for the most violent people. We're looking for the most violent guns. I hope that answered the question.
Fantastic. Thank you. All right, next question goes to Meredith. How do you deal with entity resolution across data sets, the same person, even if there's multiple iterations of their name? Do you enforce policies about collecting certain IDs in each data set, like a DL number or an SSN?
So yeah, data cleansing, garbage in, garbage out. So it's funny too. One of the main data sets that we use and rely on is APHIS. The state police in New Jersey run the APHIS program, but there's never been a checks and balances there until we turned on Backtrace and started to see errors in inputting, because we were trying to resolve people to their appearance in other data sets as well. So that's helped us work with the state police to be more precise in the data collection on the arrest end of things. Within our other data sets, we're really, really good at in ensuring that we're getting the right information. A lot of what is on the other data sets is put in by analysts. We're able to reconcile those individuals almost daily so that we only have one record of them. It's the technology that allows us to see these errors and to make sure that we are merging all those entities together. I hope that answers the question.
Outstanding. All right. Next question goes to Catherine. Are these recent technologies and systems helping with cold cases both statewide and nationally?
So sure, we have a cold case task force, and we have made some incredible jobs over the past 12 months. There's going to be one breaking very, very soon where the individual is identified and is awaiting extradition from another country. We leverage CODIS information in real time as well. The CODIS hits are sent out electronically, automatically, and then they are part of the record as well. We find that the individuals we're looking at have numerous CODIS hits, the stolen motor vehicles, and other crimes that are basically there's no resolution in those cases. So we work ad hoc to try and resolve those cases based on the individual we're talking about. But certainly there's so many opportunities when you have the data in one place to start to build processes around them. And we're still looking to refine that CODIS process. But yeah, cold case is a huge priority in New Jersey.
Okay. I think we have time for one, maybe two more questions. Next one was Backtrace built in-house or purchased as a product?
So the vendor, the state of New Jersey, we deal with multiple vendors. The vendor who created Backtrace has been on state contracts since the early 2000s and was part of really part of ALPR and offline search capability that we were using. And we started to incorporate other data sets with that vendor because they were so accommodating, fast, reliable. Not in-house. They were outside of the state police. We did try to build in-house capabilities, but they did not last. They did not last long. We find it's better to source.
All right. And then our last question goes to Mike. What might keep another state from using this kind of response to solve their gun crime, violence, and shooting issues?
Nothing. It's scalable. It's very, very scalable in other states too. We started our crime capability. I was a detective. I had two 20-year-old analysts and a bunch of Excel spreadsheets. And we started small. We started where we had influence. We identified data sets that we wanted, and then we rewarded those individuals who shared us with those data sets with intelligence products, and we built it slow and steady.
Joe, can I add one thing?
Sure.
I think with the leadership that New Jersey has, something like Backtrace in particular, is pretty cost effective for law enforcement agencies. So that's a real advantage for implementing it in other states. Would you agree on that, Joe?
100%. Yeah, we were exceptionally fortunate to have a continuity of leadership. As I stated, when I was brought into this, Colonel Fuentes was the colonel for 15 years of the New Jersey State Police and a champion of intelligence-led policing and being a good partner to the other law enforcement agencies around the state. He viewed us as a service provider. All of our unique capabilities. We're the largest police agency in the state, and we have a lot of unique capabilities. And the Fusion Center and Information was one of those capabilities. And I was just lucky enough to be brought in and then grow up in that environment.
Outstanding. Gentlemen, thank you so much. I also want to make sure I thank LeadsOnline, our sponsor for this webinar. Any closing comments you'd like to share? All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Thank you to our audience for joining us today. With that, this concludes this morning's Justice Clearinghouse webinar. Take care, everyone, and please stay safe. Bye now.
Thank you.
Thanks.